Join me today as we sew our doll pajama pants. Stay tuned and see how easy these are to sew. Alright, before we start sewing, first I want to tell you what I did off camera, and that was just a couple of things. I changed the sewing machine needle in my machine to a fresh knits appropriate needle. You need to change your needle about every 8 or so hours of sewing. I like to change them a little more often. Needles are a lot cheaper than having to replace a big chunk of my time and fabric if something goes wrong. One of the things that can go wrong is you can skip stitches, and you can also get some snags if your needle's not in good shape. The other thing I did was I set my machine up with thread that goes with our main fabric of our pajamas. It's kind of a beigey, browny color. I'm not sure what the color name is, but I will try to remember to put a picture of the spool of thread along with its color number onto the blog post. Hopefully I'll remember. Now, the pants pattern, the pants only have two pieces. They have the front back, which is cut from our main fabric, and they have the leg band, which was cut from our ribbing. I've already taken the pins out just to make things a little quicker. Now we're going to fold these with wrong sides together, right sides out, and I like to start by finding the middle and putting a pin there. This does two things. It marks my middle for me so I know where that is when I go to pin it on, and it also keeps this folded the right direction. You're going to see me do this a couple more times for the rest of the ribbing too. Get those edges lined up, fold it, and mark your middle. We're only going to put 3 pins in each one of these pieces of ribbon to pin it onto our legs. Now, the ribbon goes onto our bottom edge of our pattern piece. We're also going to mark the center of our leg. And this is easier to do now before we start pinning the ribbing on. I can't get a hold of it. I'm trying to hold this where you guys can see, trying to be more attentive to being under camera than I was last week. In fact, let me get you up just a little more. Alright, now first thing we're going to do is we are going to pin this at this end. Then we're going to pin it at the opposite end. And you'll notice the ribbing is significantly shorter than the leg is. It's because we need to stretch. That's why we needed to mark these middles. Now we're going to take these together and we're going to pin them. And that's all the pins we're going to have in here. We're going to stretch this to fit as we sew it. So off camera, I'm going to go ahead and pin this one together, and then I'll meet you at the sewing machine. All right. Now I've got my little piece of extra fabric there. I've got my machine set at the knit stitch, and I've put my tape back in the correct spot. So let's get to the edge of our little starter piece. Get this butted up against it. Don't worry about knotting your thread because we're going to sew across the seam again later. Now, stretch. Make sure you've got a couple, at least 1 stitch or 2 stitches in this end. And get a hold of that extra piece and stretch this out so that these two are the same length, which means you're not stretching the pajama fabric, you're only stretching the ribbing fabric. And keep that stretched until you get to that pin. Don't let anything unstretch. And you're only stretching from the pin to where you started. Take that pin out, and now hold on down by this edge and do the same thing. You're going to be consistently keeping this tight, not stretching the pajama fabric, just the ribbing to meet the pajama fabric. Now take the pin out. Get right to the edge and butt your next leg up. Get in so that you know. And I could tell that this was caught in here because as I tugged on this piece tried to follow. Now, again, stretch until you have that the same length. I'm not pulling hard, just enough to make them the same size. You can see that's bunched up quite a bit there where it's not being stretched. And make sure you kind of pull from here to get this edge pretty even. You want your edges to meet. You don't want one to be sticking out way past the other one. As close as you can to the pin without hitting it. Remember, we don't want to hit our pins, we don't want to sew over our pins. Cut the thread, take it out, and I had a little bit of a fold there, but that's okay. It won't show in the scheme of things as long as it's just that one little one. All right. Sorry, didn't mean to have my hand right in front of the camera there. There you go. Let me get this trimmed and cut this end off and cut these two apart. And I think we're going to move over to the ironing board just to kind of steam this in place. All right, we're going to first just kind of, I'm not really touching it, I'm just kind of steaming it here. I just want to get it. Now, the seam always goes away from the ribbing on this. So we're going to go on this side. We're just going to kind of press up a little bit. We don't really want to even press it so much as just encourage it to go up. And this is kind of optional. You don't have to do this part, but I like to. I think it looks better. But you don't want to get very much heat on that ribbing or very much, you don't want to overheat it. And there we go. We have ribbing on the bottom of our pajama pants. Let's go back to the sewing machine and see what comes next. All right, now we need to sew our center front seam. And you can always tell the back from the front because back always has more notches. So this is our center front. We're going to match up everything. All of our notches and everything need to get matched up, which is pretty simple on this one. When you try to pin, if you're using this type of fabric where it has the glittery spots, you will feel a little resistance of your pins when you go through that glitter. Don't worry about it, it's fine. You can either move the pin to a new spot or just push a little harder. Okay, let's move to the machine and sew this seam. All right, let's sew that center front seam. Make sure when you're sewing past notches that the notch isn't kind of folding up and folding back, or you won't have your full seam allowance if that happens. Right, now I'm actually not going to take you to the sewing machine this time. I'm just going to press this seam as it was sewn and then open, and then I'll be right back. You've seen me do that multiple times now. All right, that's all pressed now. And now I forgot last week, somehow I missed cutting out this piece. This is our waistband. It's cut from ribbing exactly the same way I cut the neckband. I don't know how I missed cutting this last week. So the pattern, the shorts pattern, or pants pattern actually has 4 pieces, or 3 pieces, not 2. I don't know why I missed that. Now we're going to put this, we're going to place this on the right side of our waist, at our waist, right where we sewed that. We're going to meet the pin for the center. Remember how we folded that before? We're going to meet that with that seam, and since I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and pin that first. That's fine. Now, keeping this folded, and it's going to try and fold itself crooked, so kind of try to keep it folded. There we go. And fold this. And we are going to again stretch it to meet and sew. So I'm going to move the sewing machine back up to camera view. I feel like I'm getting the camera and the sewing machine in totally different spots every time I sew today. All right. Now, get these two ends lined up as best you can, exactly where you want them. I'm actually going to move my pin. I'm not happy with that pinning position. There we go. That's better. It's not going to be perfect, and they are going to pull away at that center back seam. I'm going to go a few stitches in, and I need to stretch again. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to. I'm going to have to move you back. And since this is such a long spot, I'm going to pick a spot towards the middle. Whoops, and hold. Sorry for bumping the camera. I have yet to figure out a really good spot to set the camera. Now my fabric is trying to go that way. It's trying to run that way. So I'm going to start over on this seam. It's all right because my seam where it was sewing is actually in the seam allowance, so it won't matter. I don't have to take that out because it's not going to matter at all. That's better. I shifted you. I am so sorry. Did not mean to shift your view there. This is really a very interesting angle to have a camera at and try to work around it. And once again, it's shifting. And that happens sometimes on these long stretches of when you're sewing ribbing on. And that's okay. Just go back to where you know you're right and go again. Sometimes they want to pull. Normally I don't have this much trouble, but normally I'm not working around the camera, so my hands are in a better position to hold the fabric. I wouldn't recommend sewing around a camera if you've never done this before. Since this is such a long seam, I'm going to turn the camera off and I'm going to finish the seam off camera, and then I'll come back after I press this up, just like we did the bottom of the leg where we put the cuffs on the leg. All right, my machine was actually giving me enough trouble. I re-threaded my machine. It was having issues, and sometimes that happens. It's one of the first things to do when your machine is just misbehaving in general. Try re-threading it. Just pull your bobbin out, put the bobbin back in, pull the top thread out, put the top thread back in. A lot of times that will fix your issue, and it did. So I'm going to pin. We're now doing the center back seam. So let's get the sewing machine back up. And you notice I matched up those notches and everything. And I'm going to start at the top because I started my center front seam at the top. I try to start both of those at the same spot. And because we need to match up the top, matching the top of the ribbing is more important than matching the crotch at this point, because the crotch will take care of itself when we do the crotch seam. All right, now this one we are going to want to go in a few stitches. Come on, feed through. And don't be concerned if your ribbing is that way from the edge of your fabric. It's going to be. Okay, now I'm going to actually do an anchor stitch, just in case it wants to come undone. Because this seam is not going to be crossed again with any other seam. We're making that corner. It's a gentle corner, so we don't even have to start and stop to go around it. We can just go around it. Make sure everything is where it belongs. And once again, since I'm just going to be pressing the seam as sewn and then press it open, I'm going to go over to the ironing board without you and get that pressed so that it's ready to go to our next seam. All right, now we're going to pin our crotch seam. And once we get this sewn, we're going to be done for today because we'll have our pajama pants finished. So we're going to pin right through those two seams. I try to match those up as I pin. You've got a little notch here to match up. And the three most important places to match on this seam are going to be this crotch seam and the cuffs on each end, because that's what's going to show. So I'm going to pin this. And then I'm going to do probably 2 pins. I think I'm going to do 3 actually, just to hold this together. This fabric is fighting me just a little bit today. I think a lot of it is this glitter. My machine's not liking it. I think before I start the top, I'm going to change to another needle just in case part of my problem might be a bad needle. It could be that the needle I pulled out of the package wasn't as sharp as it could have been. That happens. So when I get done with these pants, I'm going to change the needle before we start next week's video, which will be the top. So let's move to the machine and get this sewn. All right, we're set up. I've got this right up to the edge of my ribbing. Now on this again, once I know I'm on the ribbing, I'm going to do an anchor stitch. And I'm going to do an anchor stitch at the opposite end also. An anchor stitch, I don't remember if I talked about it on the last garment, an anchor stitch on this particular stitch with my machine is just up and down in the same spot. That will help it to keep from coming unsewn. Now I'm going to sew as close to this pin as I can without hitting it. There we go. And I left my pins over there. You'll definitely feel a difference in your sewing when you come off of that seam allowance and on to just the 2 layers of fabric again. These pins I can pull out a little earlier rather, than I can the ones that are holding vital areas, like our crotch seam and our end of our cuffs. Just be sure you pull them before you get to them. Oops, I need to move you just a bit so I can put the fabric where it needs to go. There we go. Pull this a little bit better. Now you might have noticed that the waistband on this doesn't require any elastic because of the ribbed waistband, which is a nice feature. It makes it a little bit different. I managed to fold that when I pinned it, so that's okay. That's just the seam allowance folding up. It's all right. Get across there and then pull the first pin out. It's always better to put more pins in if it makes you more comfortable to pin more often than I do. go for it. Pins are there to hold your fabric together while you're sewing. Just don't run over them. Put as many as you feel like you need to get the results you want. Now I am going to show you ironing this seam out because I'm going to go pull out a really fun little tool that I've got, and I'll give you, if I can find the source for it, I will post it in the links. It's not an affiliate link or anything, it's just something that I've got that I really like using for things like this. As close as I dare get to that pin. And anchor stitch. Got it. Alright, let's go to the ironing board and iron this seam open. Alright, first let's press this as sewn. You know my rule. Press all seams as sewn before you try to press them open. Now I've got this. This is a pattern. This is made from a pattern I bought. I'm going to try and find the link. Like I said, it's a doll-sized sleeve roll, and it's really handy when you're trying to get into things like these pajama pants. Because look at that. You can put that in there. It does not look like I got that very even. We will see when we get it turned right side out. But this allows me to press this really easily. So it's up. It does get warm, so be careful. Pressing as I go. On the same pattern, there's also a little tailor's ham for doll clothes. It's also very useful, and I'll probably pull those out for some of the garments in this series. They're just a lot of fun to use. And they make pressing a lot easier because you can really get in here and not mess up the other side of your fabric. Sorry if I sound sniffly. I think spring allergies have hit. All right, let's get this over here. I'll get that center pressed. All right, let's take this to the table and try it onto the doll. Thought we would take a look at our pajama pants just laying here before I put them on the doll. I think they turned out adorable. Now if this bothers you, you can always take a needle and thread and just sew down the ends of the seam allowances there. Let me turn the camera off and get these on the doll, and I'll get her in a place where we can see her. Alright, for this shot we'll just have her sitting here. I will have a picture of her standing someplace where I can get a better view, but those are so cute. They're nice and baggy like a comfy pair of pajama pants. And they were really easy. Am I 100% happy with my job on them? No, because I fought with that waistband and I don't like the quality of the waistband. But overall, the pattern is great. That was an issue with me and my machine, so I'm not going to blame that on anything. It happens to everybody from time to time. I love how these came out. They're cute, they're adorable. And we are going to move on next week to sewing the pajama top. I hope you enjoyed this. Come back next week and see how that top goes together. Oh, and be sure and check the blog post for photos and links and all that good stuff.